database available to everybody, and we're hoping it will be an ultimate research resource for British and Irish furniture makers from the beginning of 16th century to the onset of the Great War. And we look at the biographies of furniture makers, and as such, we also see the suppliers, the structures, clientele, material they produced, and services and furniture they provided. So if you haven't seen it, please do have a look at it. It's great fun to explore it, and the search engine really is very good at allowing you to ask all sorts of questions of the database. We now have something like more than 70,000, maybe 80,000 names on it. They're rapidly getting added. And so we're very excited about the project. We're very excited about the lectures, which we've been running as part of the outreach, which is sponsored by a grant from the Foyle Foundation. So when I introduce Sean now, Sean, we move on to your slide. As I say, I think you'll see why we're so excited about Sean Clarke's contribution, looking at campaign furniture from the late 18th century to the early 20th century. And Sean and his brother Simon are the directors of Christopher Clarke Antiques in Stow-on-the-Wold. And as far as they are aware, they're the only dealers worldwide who specialize in campaign and travel furniture. So they're active researchers and writers, produced over 30 catalogs. And I do recommend, again, going to their website, which is Christopher Clarke Antique, and just have a look at all their wonderful catalogs. You'll see that Take Up Your Bed and Walk is only one of many ingeniously titled catalogs and exhibitions that they have run. But they also have more than 100 videos on YouTube, which you can see. And they actually also have a very interesting section on archives and makers. So we're thrilled that Sean agreed and offered, in fact, to talk to us today about a subject of which he has enormous experience. And so, Sean, thank you again and welcome. And I will turn off my mic as it is now your turn to talk.
Well, thank you, Adriana, and good evening and welcome to this talk on campaign furniture. I'd like to give thanks to all of the sponsors who support the FHS and BIFMO. It's much appreciated. And I realized this evening, especially for those of you who are in Britain, that I'm competing against the Antiques Roadshow. So thank you very much for joining us. As this is organised by the British and Irish Furniture Makers online website, I'm going to concentrate on items from those countries, although campaign furniture was, of course, also made in India, the Chinese ports and elsewhere. I have chosen the timeline of the late 18th to the early 20th century, as this is the golden period for portable furniture. Although the Romans, of course, had X-frame stools, and folding furniture is still being made today. But the great innovations in the design of furniture that were practical for travel were fueled by the demand created by the British as they built their empire. So, a simple question, what is campaign furniture? Well, to my mind, it is any furniture that has been made specifically for travel. It may be that it dismantles or folds to take less space, but if it doesn't, it might be clear from the construction and thickness of wood used that it was built to withstand greater rigors than if made for domestic use. You'll probably all recognize the campaign chest, such as this standard mid-19th century example on the left of the screen. Most army officers probably had at least one. It's brass bound, has flush handles, the turned feet are removable, and it splits into two boxed shaped sections, all attributes that are conducive to portability. Just because a piece of furniture has carrying handles to the side, though, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's campaign. It might simply have been to move it from one side of the room to the other. Sometimes closer examination is required. To the right of the screen is a Gothic Revival oak chest with bracket feet and ornate iron handles, not attributes that you would expect on an English campaign chest in this period. However, the thick backboards, iron straps that extend from one side to the other, and the removable iron bar used to hold the drawers in place all show that it was made for travel. It's certainly an unusual campaign chest, and why exactly it was made to this design, we don't know. Although the campaign chest is the most common item of furniture used for travel, it's the tip of the iceberg as far as the range of pieces that were made. There was the opinion that the better prepared you were, the better you would do your job, and so camp comforts were a necessity. During the Peninsular War, Lieutenant Colonel William Tompkinson wrote in a diary entry dated 1813 why he equipped himself with 600 pounds of personal baggage. My equipment may appear a large fit out for a person going on service, but experience taught us that campaign after campaign was not to be got through without the things I have stated. And the more an officer makes himself comfortable, the better will he do his duty, as well as secure his own health and the comfort of those belonging to him. It does not follow that because we attempt the best in every situation, that we cannot face the worst. The poorer the country, the greater must be your baggage, from the length of time you are obliged to march without obtaining a fresh supply. This is a Georgian mahogany bookcase with a shaped cornice and a plinth base, and as you can see, it breaks down quite comprehensively. Not many people would think that a teapoy would be necessary on campaign, but as you can see, this example has been made to dismantle. The same could be said of this painted torchère stand. It has a removable top and the three legs are held in place with a bolt through the center of the column. A sideboard is also an unusual piece to take, but once the middle section is unbolted from the cupboards and the feet and cresting rail are removed, it can be seen how much easier this version would be to pack. The secretaire to the middle also gives it an additional use. Although other countries used campaign furniture, none did so to the extent of the British in the 18th and 19th centuries. Certainly at the time of the Napoleonic Wars, the British Army was very different to that of revolutionary France. The British Army had a system that allowed the purchase of ranks, and there was a hierarchy to the regiments. This watercolour by Henry Edridge is of William H. Pitt of the Coldstream Guards. Pitt fought in the Peninsula and died from wounds received at Bayonne in 1814. Those in the top regiments, such as the Guards, tended to be well connected and came from wealthy backgrounds. As can be seen from the Army List page showing the cost of commissions, the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the Foot Guards cost £9,000 in 1860, which was twice that for a regiment of the line. To give you some idea of a monetary value at the time, a lady's maid might expect to earn about £20 a year, so 450 times less. There were some extremely well-heeled men who believed in the comforts of home whilst fighting abroad or stationed in the colonies. Napoleon's army would not countenance such a situation, and rank was awarded on merit. Whereas a French cavalry officer boasted that he could fit all he needed in his saddlebags, some British officers went to the opposite extreme. There was a strong class system in the army, as in civilian life, and how well your tent was fitted out was a good sign of your social standing. Added to this, protocol demanded that standards had to be kept up, whether you were a militia regiment in England or on a battlefield in India. This print, entitled The Invitation, or Camp Politeness, shows two officers looking to impress a lady. The tent has a tripod table on which to serve tea, and there is an X-frame chair and a bed to the back. The chair to the right of the screen, although later in date, is made to a similar design. This is an example of a Georgian portable tripod table, but is also made to adjust in height. As you can see, the top screws off and the legs are hinged to reduce its size. The armchair on the right of screen folds on an X-frame leg, and you can clearly see Chippendale's influence on the back of the chair to the design. Most of the British and Irish makers of camp equipage and travel furniture can be divided into four groups: cabinet makers, cabin fitters, trunk makers, and inventors. Although there is some crossover between the four, I'm going to discuss them in that order. During the late 18th and early 19th century, there was a great interest in metamorphic furniture. It was a short step for cabinet makers interested in designing dual-purpose furniture to also consider how to make furniture more practical for travel. With the expansion of the empire, it was also evident that there was a demand for it. Cabinet makers such as Robert Campbell, known for his metamorphic library steps patented in 1774, noted at the bottom of his trade label, all kinds of camp-equipage for gentlemen of the army, completely made and finished at the shortest notice. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, most portable furniture looked similar to its domestic equivalent, and some of the makers produced both. These two early 19th century mahogany dressing table mirrors were made by the same workshop. The one to the back on the right was made for domestic use, but the other, shown to both the left and the front in the middle, was made for travel. The domestic version has fixed uprights and the mirror is fitted on brass pins that allow it to be tilted. The campaign version has the mirror fixed to the top half of the uprights. Below this section are two knuckle joints to allow its angle to be altered. The bottom knuckle joint on each side also has a brass bolt fitting, so that the mirror, as you can see in the middle image, can be completely removed and packed down for travel. This cylinder bureau is another good example of a piece that on first glance looks like an ordinary piece of furniture. The brass collars to the tops of the legs are a good clue that they are removable. Not only do the legs unscrew, but it breaks down into three sections: the glazed bookcase to the top, the cylinder writing desk to the middle, and the drawers with tambour cupboard below. It's interesting to note that it was made to freestand, with faux doors to the backs of the bookcase and cupboard, and a faux desk fall to the middle section. This would be a very smart piece of furniture for a domestic setting, let alone a tent. Although it is likely that it had its own packing cases, it was made without thought of the damage that could be done to veneered furniture during travel, let alone from a hot, wet climate such as England.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
This is in contrast to later pieces that were mostly made.
Sean, I think we've lost you.
I've been muted.
You were muted because we
somehow
were.
I was muted.
Okay, sorry.
Where did I cut out? Shall I backtrack?
You were just talking about the fact that the furniture wouldn't be suitable in India, and then you were just going to go on after that.
Oh, okay. And whoever said brilliant, I hope they were referring to the piece of furniture. And yes, they're quite right. It's one of the best pieces of campaign furniture I think we've had. It is brilliant. This is in contrast, the veneers, which were not suitable, of course, to wet climates, to later pieces of campaign furniture, which were mostly made of solid timber with woods better suited to foreign climates, such as teak and mahogany. Important makers such as Chippendale, Sheraton and Hepplewhite designed field beds and no doubt considered other items of furniture for travel. Sheraton designed the universal table in 1791, both to answer the purpose of a breakfast and dining table. The ability to easily change the size of a table to suit your needs echoes the idea of metamorphic furniture and would be practical for an army officer who might use it both as a desk and to entertain his fellow officers at dinner. Susan Stewart notes in her 2 volumes on Gillows, in 1796, Gillows made a universal table for Colonel Stanley of the Lancashire Militia, which was clearly designed for military campaigns. Like this example, which is not marked by a maker, the legs were made to unscrew for travel. Sheraton's original design had a square section leg, but of course it makes far more sense to have a turned leg that will always line up if the legs are removable. At the turn of 1800, a group of cabinet makers with a particular interest in metamorphic and campaign furniture were located in and around Catherine Street, off Strand in London. They all produced campaign furniture to similar designs to each other. Thomas Butler was the first, with the others former employees of his or those who worked for him. Butler was located at 14 Catherine Street and is recorded as in partnership with Edward Johnson. It was dissolved in March 1787, and it seems Johnson retired at that point. In 1791, Butler was briefly joined in partnership with John Heppel before his new partner moved out and set up in business at 55 Oxford Street. At this date, Butler described his premises and adverts as an upholstery and bedding warehouse. Sofas and chairs that could be quickly converted to a bed were proving popular, and one that folded down to a compact size suited the military. Butler also made beds that could be easily set up and taken down. Although a four-poster bed might seem extravagant for travel, the ability to hang it with mosquito nets in a hot climate or drapes in a cold climate was an advantage. George Woodbury of the 18th Hussars wrote in his Peninsular Wars diary, "The enjoyment after a long and fatiguing march through a burning sun to recline on a portable bed in your tent under a fine-grown shady oak tree. How beautiful the prospect." This example by Butler can be seen in Old Governor's House, Parramatta in New South Wales. It is known that he used his Catherine Street neighbour Thomas Waldron's 1785 patent for a bed that could be assembled without the use of screws or nuts and bolts, and it is probable that this bed here was made to follow that design. Gillows designed the imperial table, but Thomas Butler made this example with legs removable for travel. Aside from a cabinet maker, Butler was also a nonconformist minister at Charlton near Hitchin, and perhaps it was his secondary occupation that led him to retire and then return to Catherine Street twice. In late 1800, he sold his business to Thomas Oxenham, who had been called in to value it for sale. This was much to the chagrin of Butler's foreman, Morgan and Sanders, who believed it had been promised to them. Thomas Morgan and Joseph Sanders set up in rivalry to Oxenham as his neighbours at 16 and 17 Catherine Street. They also carried out a campaign of newspaper adverts disparaging of both Butler and Oxenham while seeking to elevate themselves. Much of their work was similar to Butler, and in fact they claimed that they were the originators of some of his designs. This section of one of their sales flyers is also similar to those Butler produced, and it's a good illustration of the range of items most of the Catherine Street makers made. To the top left is an imperial table, similar to the one we previously showed by Butler. The text notes that it can be set to dine between 4 and 100, and that the whole can be packed into a box only 10 inches deep. Morgan and Sanders were very good at promoting themselves and have a name that more people know today than Thomas Butler's. They also created new designs. Their metamorphic armchair that converts to library steps is a piece strongly associated with the company. But you will also see to the top centre of this flyer their patent Trafalgar sideboard, which contained a dining table. They had supplied Nelson and Emma Hamilton with furniture for their Merton home and were keen to capitalise on their association with Britain's naval hero, also renaming their premises Trafalgar House. This flyer also shows sofa and chair beds and portable chairs, a dozen of which they say pack into the space of 2 common chairs. In 1818, Sanders died and the company changed their name to Morgan & Co. 2 years later, Thomas Morgan sold the company to John Durham, a foreman in the business. He manufactured many of the same items as his former employee. This form of chair bed was made by most of the Catherine Street makers. With the posts removed, the sides can be unbolted from the back and all will fold down to rest on the chair seat, dramatically reducing its size. John Durham declared bankruptcy in 1826 and then moved to 16 Rupert Street, where he continued in business until 1835. In 1802, 2 years after his first retirement, Thomas Butler bought his former business back from Oxenham and continued for another 8 years. In 1810, he retired once more, this time selling the business to Edward Argles, who made this Bergère version of the chair bed. Edward Argles started as a cabinet maker in Maidstone, first with his father Thomas, and then in his own right from 1795. He probably saw the move to London as a good opportunity to grow his business. The brass inset plaque to the front of the seat on this Bergère chair bed is engraved Argles, late Butler's patent, 13 and 14 Catherine Street. Despite supplying the Prince of Wales with, quote, very elegant Royal Library writing tables made in rosewood and banded in satinwood, Argles did not make a success of the business, and he was declared bankrupt in June 1813. Once more, Butler returned, but this time he only lasted a year, perhaps because he had lost too many key employees. His son-in-law, John Steens, who had been with him since 1793, took the opportunity when Argles moved in to set up in business with George Pryor and John Mackenzie, who had also been employed by Butler. Pryor, Steens and Mackenzie established themselves at Bridges Street, which ran on north from Catherine Street. In July 1814, Butler retired for the final time, and his stock was auctioned over 3 days. Morgan and Sanders, who obviously still held a grudge, later advertised that they had taken over a considerable part of Butler's premises as one final jab at their former employer. Oxenham moved to 354 Oxford Street when he left Catherine Street and continued to make the same items of furniture that Butler and Morgan and Sanders had popularised. He also subscribed to Sheraton's Cabinet Directory in 1803. He advertised his work as costing 10 to 20% less than those in Catherine Street, with a sofa bed, like the design shown here, costing 18 guineas, as opposed to the 21 or 22 guineas it would cost from his rivals. The sofa bed dismantles in a similar way to the chair bed, with the back and sides unbolting from each other. However, instead of being hinged to the seat section, the back and sides are located on mortise and tenon joints. Portable furniture was not just used by the army, of course. Furniture that could be folded up or moved quickly without the need to unscrew legs or bolts was important to the Navy. As can be seen on this illustration by G. Webb of his cabin on board the Asia, even the officers' quarters had cannon, and it is surrounded by furniture. When enemy ships were spotted and the call to clear the decks was given, everything had to be moved as quickly as possible to get the guns into action and to minimize the deadly splinters of wood caused by the enemy's fire. This bureau is very similar to its domestic version, but as you can see, it splits into two, and both sections have carrying handles. It could be moved easily in tight spaces, and the handles could also be used to tie it down in rough seas. The bottom section may well have been taken down to the orlop deck below the waterline, where the surgeon worked during battle. It will be used with others to make temporary operating tables. This type of chair was made with the Navy in mind, and it folds very quickly on a series of hinges. The seat lifts to fold against the back, and then the front rail and the legs of a chair can be pushed to the back, with the side stretchers folding in half towards the centre. Examples can be seen on HMS Victory. Treve Rosamond wrote an excellent article entitled Some Aspects of 18th Century Naval Furniture for the Furniture History Society's Journal of 1997, if you wish to learn more and have a copy. With the increase in travel to Britain's expanding empire, a need arose for people to supply and fit the cabins that people would hire to get to the other side of the world. You could be on an East Indiaman bound for India for up to 6 months, and when you hired a cabin on board, it was empty. So you needed to fit it out very well to make the journey as bearable as possible. The furniture could then be sold to someone who perhaps was returning to England or either used for further travel or in your new home. The label on this Secretaire campaign chest to the left by Ramsey & Co. describes the business as an old manufactory of solid mahogany cabin furniture on the newest principles. A line further down notes, cabins fitted with every article requisite for the use of passengers on the shortest notice. Ramsey's address of 83 High Street, Poplar, was close to Blackwall and the docks, making it very easy for him to fulfill his promise of cabin fitting. It is believed that Ramsey started in business around 1800 and used the name to the label shown until 1811, when they listed themselves as J&E Ramsey, before becoming Ramsey & Carter in 1813. The lack of brass corners and strapwork, coupled with a moulding that slightly overhangs to the top and base of his chest, is an indicator of its earlier age. We can see that thought has been given to its design for travel because it's made in two parts and it's got flush skeletal campaign handles. But all of the principles of the campaign chest shown at the start of this talk have not yet been arrived at. Likewise, the cabin desk by Ramsey to the right of your screen, although clearly made for travel, does not dismantle. Maynard & Co. were one of a number of companies who developed a business that could offer every assistance to the traveller to the east, from booking their passage and selecting their cabin, to supplying and cabin fitting their portable furniture. The company started in 1814 as R. Maynard, drapers at 8 Ludgate Street, but by 1828 had become Maynard & Pine, listing themselves as an East India and British shawl warehouse. As importers of silks and textiles from India, Maynard soon realised that there was a good opportunity to provide a complete service to the many travellers to the east. It's likely that they already had good connections with the captains of the East Indiamen ships through buying their fabrics they'd brought back from India. These connections were used to develop and expand their business. Maynard offered travellers the whole package, from keeping a register of ships to the east and intelligence from India, to arranging insurance, forwarding packets, clearing warehousing, and delivering baggage on return of families from India.
Look at this over here.
This also included the supply of cabin and campaign furniture. They aimed their adverts at gentlemen, ladies, officers and their families, writers, assistant surgeons, and army and naval cadets. Many of their goods would have been bought in or commissioned, with a final line in an advert of 1831 stating, "Samples of goods suited for India will be received for sale." Maynard underwent various name and address changes throughout their history, which lasted for a good part of the 19th century. Their name had changed briefly to Maynard & Pine, but in 1831, R. Maynard advertised that he respectfully announces he has moved to 27 Poultry under the firm of Maynard & Co. for the supply of entire outfits for ladies and gentlemen with every new and improved invention for cabin furniture, on such a principle of decided economy consistent with the superiority of the articles. In 1843, Maynard was joined by Harris, and by 1858, the name changed again to Maynard, Harris and Grice, as shown on this invoice. The invoice is for goods purchased by Lonsdale Kirkpatrick Howard of the 14th Buckinghamshire Regiment. Howard purchased his commission on the 29th of July 1862, and the following year went out to join the 2nd Battalion of his regiment in New Zealand. Amongst the items Howard bought were a slide glass and a bronze patent chaise or chair with carpet cushions and valise. He also paid for carriage to docks and shipping, dock dues, and the carpenter's time in fitting his cabin with a birthplace and a bookshelf. A slide glass is a mirror with a removable protective board, like the example illustrated to the top middle of our screen. Brown Brothers had premises at 165 Piccadilly, London, and although they made other camp equipage, they were perhaps best known for this iron chair, which you can see, which could be reclined almost to the horizontal position. Other items Maynard are known to have sold are a sleeping couch with drawers and chintz covers, which we would now describe as a cabin bed, mahogany tables containing a washstand, which others refer to as a ship's table, double chest of drawers, which of course is a campaign chest, trunks and strong sea chests, writing desks, pairs of bullock trunks, chairs and portable stools, and mahogany swinging tables, which were trays suspended to move with a ship in your cabin. This watercolor was probably painted by an anonymous army officer. It shows a Brown Brothers patent suspensory chair, and similar to the one which is listed on the Maynard invoice and we saw on the last screen. The other chair is an ebonized X-frame folding chair, which is sometimes called a kangaroo chair. Beneath a porthole in the picture is a folding shelf on bracket, which could be collapsed to create more space. And adjacent, there is a high shelf with a retaining bar, both probably put in place by a cabin fitter. There's also a Pembroke table, which might also be a washstand or a ship's table, with a towware water jug and two boxes underneath, but look to be a box mirror and writing slope. The ship's table has washstand fittings under the top central board and was made by a number of different workshops. John Shepard was both a cabin fitter and a trunk maker. The painted stencil used on his later furniture gives his established date as 1778, and several generations with the same forename ran the company. It is listed throughout its 100-year history mostly as trunk makers, but it's clear from this sales flyer that cabin, camp and barrack furniture was a large part of the business. The illustration to the center of the flyer gives a wonderful insight to the type of furniture that your cabin could be fitted with. There is a Secretaire campaign chest to the right, an X-frame chair, a washstand to the back corner, and a cabin bed. A cabin bed was a very useful piece of furniture, providing a sofa, a bed, and drawers for storage. The design probably originated with the Chinese, and most cabin beds found today were made in India. This flyer and an example shown on a later slide shows that some, of course, were also made by British companies. Shepard's flyer lists groups of items for first-class passengers, second-class and third-class. Amongst the furniture noted are a bookcase to fold in a box, washstand to form a table fitted, probably a ship's table, swing trays and folding tables, American chairs, camp stools and sea chests. The bookcase to fold in a box would have taken a similar form to these two examples, and they work to the same principle as the bookcase shown at the beginning of this talk. Most were hinged to the middle, like the Reverend Cuthbert's shown on the left, and this allowed them to fold like a book, becoming a box that enclosed the contents. It's unusual for a portable bookcase to have an owner's name to it, but Cuthbert was given his by the clergy of the Diocese of Leighlin on his departure to India, and they commemorated it with an engraved plate. George Goring Cuthbert was a resident of Dublin Street, Carlow, Ireland, when he decided to join the Church Missionary Society. The year he left, 1845, was also the time of the Great Famine. We can assume that the bookcase was made in Ireland, and although it might have been made in Dublin, there were at least 4 cabinet makers in Carlow at this date: Michael Barrington, Bernard, Peter Nolan and William Pendred, and the last two worked in the same street that Cuthbert lived in. The early 19th century bookcase to the right is a little more unusual, with 2 wings that are half the size of the central section, so that they will fold to meet and form the box. The American chairs that Shepard referred to were made of wrought iron and could be purchased with a variety of different front legs, from shaped flat iron bars to more decorative turned wood or brass tube. Most seen today have been stripped back to the metal or started life simply painted back black. This example stands out for retaining its original faux wood paint finish. Although it's known that they were used by army officers, the chair gained their popularity and name from the American Gold Rush. They could be manufactured quickly, withstand more than a wooden chair, and were more affordable. When the Victoria gold rush followed in 1851, they were advertised as California chairs in the Australian press to appeal to those seeking their fortune. This cabin bed is similar to the one illustrated on John Shepard's flyer and was made by S.W. Silver. The company Stephen Winkworth Silver & Co. appear to have started life in 1838 as clothiers, with premises in London and Liverpool. They focused their business on servicing the large number of people moving across the globe to police and administer the empire or start a new life. They grew to be able to offer everything that could be needed, from clothes and linen to china and campaign furniture. In the London Illustrated News of July 29, 1848, S.W. Silver described their emigration outfitting being exclusively at number 4 Bishopsgate Within, while Navy and military officers, midshipmen, cadets, civilians, ladies, etc. are outfitted as heretofore at the Cabin Passenger Outfitting Warehouse, numbers 66 and 67, Cornhill, London, and St George's Crescent, Liverpool. They capitalised on the need for emigration to Australia and New Zealand and boasted that they had a representative in every Australian colony to whom they shipped clothing monthly. And as they had a large interest in maintaining these colonies, that they could supply a complete outfit, including bedding for male or female emigrants from £4 net upwards or less, £2 if needful, to make emigrating easier. In 1861, Silver advertised in the London Commercial Directory that they could supply furniture for camp, barrack, cabin and colonial use, embracing every variety of cabinet work, canteens, trunks, portmanteaus, etc. This slide shows a late 19th century low camp table by Silver. It's a clever design with a hinged legs folding in pairs. Angled support bars are hinged to fold from underneath the top and have a brass fitting that passes through the leg and is held by a peg. It's quite a plain utilitarian piece of furniture that takes little space when packed, but it would be affordable to those emigrating. S.W. Silver were the only English furniture company to participate in the New Zealand exhibition of 1865, a fact not unnoticed by the judges, who wrote in their reports and awards, the suitability of some exhibits of furniture where lightness, portability and convenience are required is particularly noticeable in some chairs, which although fit for luxuriantly furnished apartments in point of appearance, can yet be folded and removed with all the readiness of a camp stool. By 1875, the company had an explorer's room at their premises in Cornhill, and they also had expanded to take in 4 Sun Court, Cornhill, where they had an office of the colonies. S.W. Silver's strong connections in the East meant that they were ideally placed to import India rubber as a business alongside their clothing and furniture. The European discovery of the qualities of gutta-percha in the 1840s were to have a dramatic effect on S.W. Silver's business. They started to produce waterproof clothing alongside their other requisites for travellers. This expanded to using rubber in making insulating wire and cable, and was so successful that in 1832 they took the step to move north across the Thames to Woolwich Reach. They also started to make gutta-percha golf balls and other sporting equipment. Their factory became so large, covering about 15 acres, and employed so many people, approximately 2,800, that the area became known as Silvertown. A number of the well-known makers of campaign furniture from the early to late 19th century had their origins in the trunk-making business. We've already mentioned that is how John Shepard started. J.T. Thompson, perhaps the best-known maker of portable beds, also started that way, and this trunk bed perfectly illustrates his transformation from trunk to bed maker. The origins of J.T. Thompson lay with Robert Baker, who was in business at 117 Longacre in 1805 as a coach blind and trunk maker. By 1808, he had moved to 116 Longacre and been joined in business by John Strachan and John Thompson. It is possible they were Baker's former employees who had bought into the business when Baker was due to retire, because in 1809, the company was mutually dissolved, becoming Strachan and Thompson. By 1811, they were advertising camp equipage, especially suited to the army in Portugal, and also had Hunter & Co. of Edinburgh acting as their agents. A year later, Thompson's name was on the company's Sun Life Insurance, and Strachan was gone. Thompson took the trouble of following the army during the Peninsular War to improve his bed, learning firsthand the rigours it had to endure and the practicality needed by the army. He offered variants on the bed suited to the destination of the officer, and also sold a similar model to this one, which was independent of its packing case. This trunk bed can be quickly set up and packed down, and can be used with or without the canopy. It's unlikely the idea of a bed folding out of the trunk originated with Thompson, as other makers such as William Chappell illustrated similar designs on their trade labels. However, there is no doubt that he improved the design, and as he noted in his adverts, he was the sole patentee of a brass-plated iron tubing, whose qualities made it both stronger, yet a third of the weight of standard brass or iron beds. By 1817, Thompson looked to capitalise on Waterloo and the Duke's fondness for sleeping in his campaign bed by naming those he manufactured the Wellington. This brass camp bed is very likely to have been made by Thompson. The Duke reluctantly became Prime Minister in 1828, and his government was not popular. Our lecture title, Take Up Your Bed and Walk, is taken from this 1829 satirical print by William Heath. It was well known Wellington's camp bed travelled with him between Walmer Castle and Downing Street, and the call, of course, was for him to resign. Although there were many camp bed manufacturers in the 19th century, all claiming theirs were far superior to others on the market, Thompson can rightly be seen as one of the leaders in the field. Other companies that started as trunk makers and added camp equipage to their inventory included J.W. Allen, William Day, Drew and Sons, Hill and Millard, and John Pound. They were all in London and all produced many similar items to each other. By the third quarter of the 19th century, an outfit of furniture needed by an officer was soon arrived at by these makers and advertised in the army list, as you can see. The outfit typically included a chest of drawers with packing cases that could also be used as a wardrobe, an iron camp bed, a washstand that packed into a tub, and a duro chair with a packing case that could be converted to a table. In the second half of the 19th century, most British and Irish campaign chests were available to buy with ironclad, painted pine or deal packing cases, as shown in the previous adverts. For this reason, they did not have carrying handles unless they were flush like some of S.W. Silver's. After the chest was removed, the packing cases could be set one on top of the other, and a shelf slid into each to provide a wardrobe as a secondary piece of furniture, like the example shown on this slide. Most chests have long since departed company with their packing cases, which were either destroyed or given another use when the officer retired. Some chests have later been married up with packing cases, but it's normally apparent if it's not a good, tight fit. Most outfits of barrack furniture came with a washstand, such as this one, and the simple but clever method of construction was one which had been used for campaign shelves since the early part of the 19th century. The brass standards unscrew so that each shelf can be removed in turn, leaving you with 3 boards, 8 brass rods, 4 feet and 4 finials. The parts can then all be packed into a painted wooden wash tub. This tub belonged to Lord Faulkner of the Scots Guards who fought in the Boer War. This iron camp bed was made by Hill and Millard and belonged to John Robert Gladstone, nephew to the Prime Minister William Gladstone. It is perhaps no surprise that coming from such a well-established family, he joined the Coldstream Guards as a sub-lieutenant on the 6th of December 1873. The Douro chair was named after the river that was well known to Wellington's army during the Peninsular War. It folds on X-frame legs, and the back can be reclined to several positions by adjusting the eyelets to the leather arm straps to the hooks on the arm posts. Some examples came with an extending footrest, which allowed the chair to be used as a bed when fully reclined. Its packing case came with 4 screw-in legs so that it could be converted to a table. The square back and brass rod to hold the back cushion suggests that the chair on the right was made by Hill & Millard. The chair to the left is labelled for J.W. Allen and has the shaped back that they commonly used. Although these London makers offered affordable outfits of barrack furniture with items in common to each other, it wasn't the full extent of camp equipage that they sold. Furniture was offered in different timbers and levels of quality, and they also sold smarter patented items. The design for this Davenport was registered by Allen on the 20th of May 1853. It's ironic that the piece of furniture that Gillows designed to be an easily portable desk for the captain whose name it bears had developed to such an extent that ways to make a version that dismantled had to be considered. The barley twist legs, of course, were fashionable to the day and would aid sales, but they were not conducive to travel. So, as you can see, Allen made it to break down to fit into a packing case. J.W. Allen had a thriving trunk and luggage business, but were also one of the longest standing barrack and camp equipage makers in British history. They were established in 1798 and by the 1820s were shown in the trade directories at 22 Strand. By 1865, they had opened very large smart premises at 37 Strand, and they were still there in 1912. The Albert chair was another clever design sold by Allen. It offered more comfort than a Duro with an upholstered seat and back. It also folded down quickly on a number of hinges without the need to unscrew legs or bolts. Hill & Millard were also innovative in their designs. To look at this desk setup, it is difficult to believe that it breaks down for travel, but as you can see, it does so very effectively. Richard Millard worked for 40 years for J.W. Allen, starting as a boy and rising to such a level that he was designing patented items. Henry Hill was a military tailor on Old Bond Street and persuaded Millard to leave Allen and set up in partnership with him in 1854. Henry's brother William was to come in as a sleeping partner after 3 years. They took out a lease on 7 Duncannon Street, close to Trafalgar Square, and ran a successful business, which they described as naval, military and general outfitters, portmanteau, travelling and dressing case manufacturers. Like many others, they called their premises a portable military furniture warehouse. The business was driven by Richard Millard and was a great success, still enjoying a good name today for quality. However, by 1870, Millard was fed up with William's intemperance and not accounting for money he had overdrawn, and Henry's lack of input into the company. He gave both a notice of dissolution, but Henry persuaded him to continue if William retired. 4 years later, Richard Millard dissolved the company, paying Henry Hill £5,000 and continuing on his own. Millard died in 1886, but the business continued until at least 1934. This table on the right by Hill & Millard is a simple but clever design, with the top forming a packing case for the screw-in legs. Gregory Kane was described in the Treble Almanac of 1829 as a trunk maker with premises at 8.5 Fishamble Street, Dublin. In 1846, after a few changes of address, he moved to 69 Dame Street, and it is at this point that he notes military chests in his adverts for the first time. This was to remain his address, and he expanded over the years to include the properties to either side. Kane was an inventive maker and won several medals at the Royal Dublin Society, as can be seen on his sales flyer. His travelling cabinet, which was shown at the Great Exhibition of 1851, contained a bookcase, a circular table, a side table, a sofa table, a mahogany couch, 6 chairs, curtains, a carpet and a hearth rug. The cylinder bureau shown here on the left is an unusual piece of campaign furniture, and it uses Kane's patented flush handle. You might spot the illustration of a ship's table if you look carefully, the one that we discussed earlier, to the middle right of Kane's flyer, where he actually names it as such. This large secretaire chest with cupboard by Kane packs down to a size not much larger than a standard military chest. The cupboard to the top has removable doors, and the sides, back and top are all hinged to fold down. It can be dated from its Chubb lock, which is registered to the 15th of November 1850. The tripod table to the right of your screen has a top formed from part of a packing case. But of course, once it has a tablecloth over it, you only see the elegant mahogany column and the legs below. Kane died in 1887 after a long and successful career. Although he started as a trunk maker and they remained an important part of his business, his camp equipage was innovative and well made. He even invented a portable house. He advertised that his articles could not be excelled by the best London houses, and he was probably right. More can be read on Kane in the FHS's Journal of 1985, where the Knight of Glyn was written about Dublin trade directories and labels. Ross & Co of Ellis Quay, Dublin are amongst the most celebrated of campaign furniture makers and were active throughout most of the 19th century. They advertised that they were established in 1790, but their first known directory listing is as Eleanor Ross at 6 Ellis Quay in 1820. 2 years later, the title Army Furniture Warehouse was added to their listing. At different points, the company listed various combinations of addresses on Ellis Quay, and by 1860 had changed their name from E. Ross to Ross & Co. Ellis Quay, of course, was just around the corner from the largest military barracks in Europe. So they had a captive audience and were very well placed. By the mid-19th century, most items of campaign furniture adhered to the pared down form that made it easier to pack and more robust. Perhaps because they were removed from London, Ross's furniture, apart from their campaign chests, didn't conform to the accepted style developed by the English makers. Ross did things differently. Much of their work had the fashionable design features typical of the William IV and Victorian periods. This would, of course, have given their cabinet making far greater appeal than that which was purely utilitarian, an important factor to their customers, who would mostly have been well-heeled gentlemen officers with an eye for the stylish. Today, the balloon-back chair is known to be a fragile design, even for domestic use. To make campaign chairs with balloon backs like those on the right of your screen seems foolish. But given that it is one of the most common campaign chairs to be found today, they must have sold an awful lot of them. The chairs to the middle of the screen are interesting for their leather backs, which are embossed for the 6th Battalion King's Liverpool Regiment. The 6th Battalion was formed in 1888, and these chairs would have been ordered for the officers' mess. Most campaign furniture was privately purchased, so it's quite interesting to see some pieces that were evidently purchased for communal use. Ross gave the option of buying a suite of furniture, which would all pack neatly into this chiffonier, with the instruction on how to do so to a label to the inside of a door. Such a set would have a combination of a short set of dining chairs, like those on the previous slide, an easy chair, a couch and a centre table. The packing case cabinets were often adorned with carved decoration and moulding, which again was unusual for campaign furniture of this date, which mostly considered flat surfaces and square edges to be a prerequisite. The painted sides and top would be tidied up by the material held by the removable moulding bars to the sides of the cabinet. For travel, the ornate cresting rail would be removed, and the applied carving to the doors and the drawer at the front of a chiffonier would be protected with a bolt-on panel. Here are some further examples of Ross's work. A low occasional table, if we go from left to right, a mahogany cupboard for a chamber pot, a walnut desk with removable legs, and a low armchair with carved back rails. They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and this is true with some of Ross's designs. The blue armchair to the left is by Ross and would likely have been part of a suite that packed into the chiffonier. The maker of the leather armchair to the right is unknown, but they have clearly copied Ross's method for dismantling an upholstered easy chair. The chair also has the added interest because one of the back legs is stamped for the mess of the 2nd Bedfordshire Regiment. Our final group of makers are the Victorian inventors. These inventors weren't specifically camp equipage makers, but believed that they could improve on the designs of previous generations or come up with new solutions to make life better. Before 1866, 28 patents were taken out for chairs. Then from this date onwards, up to 1900, 305 patents alone were taken out on folding chairs. The chair to the left is the Bavey stock, patented in 1886. The box under the arm pads held a strong spring linking the front and the back of the arms. As you relaxed back in the chair, it would recline as the spring extended. In the second half of the 19th century, portable furniture was also being used more and more at home. It was practical for sporting events and to take into the garden. Companies like the Army and Navy Cooperative Society had their own barrack furniture department, but they also marketed some of these items as useful for sporting events and picnicking. The luxury shops in and around Bond Street also realised that there was a demand for good practical designs, like this games table by Thornhill on the right of your screen, that will quickly assemble itself out of a small case, again with a clever use of hinges. Thornhill also patented this folding picnic table with benches in 1885. All 3 pieces fold, with the table acting as the packing cases for the benches. It was such a good idea that a modern version in plastic and aluminium can still be found in camping shops today. This stool on the left is stamped to all its parts, registered 26th of July 1878, and it was designed by Charles Green. He described it as specially fitted for fishing, cricket, sketching, picnics, and many other purposes. It supplies a want long felt and is combined with elegance and durability. The table to the right was designed by Bradley Barnard and was patented 3 months before the Green stool. The patent shows that he also produced a version with arms that held a wash basin, a mirror, an adjustable reading stand, and a chandelier. His brass trademark plaque carries the logo "Packed for Travelling," and it shows a dismantled table. Portable furniture had come a long way in 100 years, and the life of the soldier or traveller could be very comfortable. However, the culture of the British Army was slowly changing. It had to. The purchase of commissions was abolished in 1871 as part of the restructuring of the army after the Cardwell reforms, but it took a number of years for the practice to completely cease. Hugh Arnold Forster, the Secretary of State for War, said in 1903, "The British Army is a social institution prepared for every emergency except that of war." The use of personal campaign furniture by army officers declined at the start of the 20th century. The way war was conducted was changing, and the Boers gave a sharp lesson as to how effective a fast-moving guerrilla army could be. This cartoon from the Graphic magazine in 1901 shows a cumbersome British army carrying all sorts of items, including a grandfather clock, a piano, a mirrored overmantel, a dog's kennel, which you can see to the back left of the cartoon, and to the front right of the cartoon, a soldier's got a lawnmower over his shoulders. The title of the cartoon reads, "A Mobile Column in South Africa," with an explanatory caption above stating an order allegedly issued by Lord Kitchener to the commanders of columns. The Commander-in-Chief in South Africa desires to impress on officers in command of mobile columns that the object of such columns is mobility. Campaign furniture did leave a legacy of good design, though, born out of a utilitarian need. To the left is the Paragon chair, patented by J.B. Fenby in March 1877. And to the right is a Roorkee chair, designed by British Army engineers at the end of the 19th century in India. Both look ahead of their time, and both were a direct influence on important 20th century designers. In 1940, Jorg Ferrari Hardoy, Juan Kirchan, and Antonio Bone designed the famous butterfly chair, made of dismantling metal sections. And although made in a different way, it's clear that it looks exactly like Fenby's chair. Today, a modern version of a Paragon with a cup holder to the arm is available at any number of service stations on the way to the coast. The Roorkee chair is considered an iconic piece of campaign furniture, and Kerr Clint made a version called the Safari chair in 1933. A number of companies still produce the Roorkee today, and Christopher Schwartz has made it a favourite item to make amongst woodworkers in America. The military chest was designed for the practicality of travel. But today, a square mahogany chest with brass straps highlighting the corners looks good in most settings. So much so that it's now fashionable to update tired pieces of modern furniture with brass straps and corners. As an antique dealer, I, of course, would always recommend that you go for period pieces. That's the end of my talk, and I thank you for listening.
And Sean, we thank you. My goodness, it's a wealth from the furniture makers themselves and their lives to the patents. And I love that slide of carrying the piano in battle. I think we've all probably got wonderful things to comment or to ask you about. But while you all do have a think about what you'd like to ask Sean, and do remember to put them in the chat, and we will go back to them in a minute. I would just like to take the opportunity to remind you all that we have the next lecture, which is going to be on Irish furniture, so very much again connected with the Furniture History Society in BIFMO, but it's going to be offered by the Society on a Wednesday. So do make a note of that and make a point of attending. And Sean, if we can look at the, sorry, and this is obviously by Claudia Kinmonth, who's just published her book on Irish country furniture. So we've had a taste of Ireland. Now on the 26th, you can have another in-depth look at Irish furniture. Sean, could we just have the last slide? And I wanted to take the opportunity, as this is our last session actually for BIFMO itself, just to say thank you to all our wonderful speakers who have journeyed with us this year. And as you can see, we have had a huge variety of talks from the first ones in the summer, and when we looked, we also went up to Scotland with Sebastian Pryke, Net Carruthers on arts and crafts furniture in Gimson. We've had lectures on Huguenots and on, well, there's such a huge variety of things, Crace, etc. I can't mention them all. But we are going to disappear. We're going to be packing up our things and putting them into our campaign trunks. And we're going to be thinking over the summer about the research projects which are a part of the whole outreach program, which is young research students carrying out research over the summer. They're going to be doing some digital projects with country houses, which is fantastic. And we are in the autumn going to offer another online course, Introduction to English Furniture. So don't go away. Do come back and do follow through with everything in the that we've been doing. So thank you all. And as I say, I think there are some of our speakers in the audience. So thank them particularly, of course, for joining us again this evening. Now, I want to take the chance that we have to talk to Sean and ask him more questions. So if, Sean, you would like to turn off the screen, you can come yourself, and people can address questions to you. I have to say that at the moment, what I'm getting is lots of nice comments, and thanks for the overview, which we know it cost you a lot to get all of that into, of all the many things you wanted to tell us, but it really was a wonderful taster for everything, and just showing how important campaign furniture and the makers were in that whole business. So I'm just going to go back and look. There are just so many.
Carruthers has
Thank
put a
you.
question. Have you seen that?
I was just going to say, I see that Net Carruthers has a question, and I'm just going to go back to it. I just wanted to check that there was something else, and so I'm running it through. If you can see it, you can also have a look.
Yeah.
She says, do the buyers of this kind of furniture now tend to be collectors of a lot of it, or people who have one distinctive piece because they're quite quirky? So what is your collector?
A good question, and it's a real mix of people, really. There are a lot of collectors, and they collect for different reasons. They might collect because they are interested in a particular war. And so any piece of furniture that belonged to an officer who was involved in, say, the Crimea appeals to them. They are interested in different regiments, likewise. But also, a lot of people tend to have always wanted a campaign chest. You know, one piece of furniture they always like is a campaign chest. And if they're going to buy one thing, that tends to be it. But people also buy purely because the design is fantastic. So someone might walk into the shop and they haven't looked at the signs above the door, and they don't realize that we deal in campaign furniture, and they see the Thornhill briefcase that I showed earlier, and you demonstrate to them that just by lifting the top of the briefcase, the legs fold out and fit into position, and all of a sudden you've got a games table. And they fall in love with brilliant design. And it is brilliant design. So they buy because of that. People buy for practical reasons. We had one couple who very recently had a loft conversion, but in order to do the loft conversion, they had to make the entry to it, the staircase to it, quite tight and small. And so an armchair similar to the one by Ross, which comes apart, was perfect for their needs to get it up the stairs into the loft conversion. So a number of reasons, a lot of collectors, a lot of people who've always just wanted a campaign chest, and a lot of people who buy things for the practicality that they hold today, like the chair bed at the beginning by Durham and the other Catherine Street makers, Morgan and Sanders and Butler. People still buy those for use today as a spare bed.
Well, I can quite see it. I mean, that, as you say, the practicality and the design absolutely makes it riveting. And I also am just fascinated by that whole thing of patents. I mean, so many patents. It must have been very, very competitive and preserve, and obviously really important to protect your special way in which you were making the furniture dismantle and things. Because how many did you say there were? Just really hundreds at one point.
Well, yes, before 1866 on all chairs, I think, what was the figure, 28? And then from 1866 to 1900, just on folding chairs, 306. So, yeah, I mean, the second half of the 19th century, the Victorians went crazy, and many of them knew that they could find a better way to do things, and they could improve. They could improve on things greatly. So there was a huge number of patents taken out.
Yeah, amazing. So obviously you've got really people getting very excited, and one wants to know if you have other areas of expertise apart from campaign furniture. Obviously going to follow you through.
I'm afraid we, as a business, we specialize just in campaign furniture. And although there are lots of areas of that which are worthy of lectures on their own, we stick to campaign furniture. I have done a lecture called the Journey to Another World, which is about traveling to India in the 19th century and how travel changed and the furniture that you would take. And that was a more in-depth look at cabin furniture and its makers.
Yeah.
But no, we stick to campaign and cabin furniture.
And we should remind people that they can look at your website if they want to see any of those. Kate Hay asked if there were pieces of campaign furniture in public collections or on other galleries that you know about.
Well, there is some out there, not as much as naturally we feel there should be. The National Army Museum have got a few pieces which are on display, a few pieces by Ross. They've got a lot of items which are also tucked away, like many of these museums, but they just don't have the space to show at the moment. There are a few pieces scattered around, but I'm afraid there isn't one place I can point you to, one museum, to go and see a large quantity of it. I mean, it would be lovely if one of these museums did an exhibition on campaign furniture, and we would certainly be happy to help them assemble enough items.
Yeah, it would be a wonderful one, yes, because it's so integral to everything. So moving forward, David Walker asks if there's much written or good single resource about English-Irish furniture makers working in the colonies during the 19th century, making this sort of furniture, or was the vast majority made in Britain? You did touch on that at the beginning, but I think obviously you tantalize somebody.
There is a very good book on New Zealand furniture. I'm afraid this is terrible. The author has been into the shop many years ago, and we have a copy. I can't remember his name. It's a big tome, but it's a very good book, and that's got a little bit on campaign furniture in it. But the vast majority of it was made by British Irish makers or colonial makers. So a lot of the Chinese ports made campaign furniture. They made it in a slightly different way, although some of the designs are similar. They didn't have packing cases so much, and most of the items went straight on board ship. In India, there were a number of companies who made campaign furniture. There were some British companies who set up, and the Army and Navy store, of course, they had outlets in India as well. But the vast majority of it was British and made in England and Ireland.
Yeah. So, another one. Is there a comprehensive book on the matter? Well, I think if there isn't, there's obviously going to be soon, Sean. But I think you'll have to be the one to write it.
Yeah, I mean, there is a book already written by Nicholas Brower called British Campaign Furniture, Elegance Under Canvas. It was published about 20 years ago and only went to one edition. You can find it, but it costs sort of 250 to 350 pounds now. Yes, I mean, we have written ourselves over 30 catalogues. We've got a huge wealth of information in our archives. And you're right, we should write a book. It's finding the time to do it, and not just write it, but of course to triple check all of your research.
But your list of makers and your archives is brilliant. And I mean, of course,
thank you.
That's something we have to probably talk to you more about. There's one last question, which is what I said, you can imagine, but it boils saying, here's a mahogany military chest inherited from Richard Jones's grandmother, thinking it belonged to her father, who was a civil engineer in northwest India in the late 19th century. So how would you date it? I mean, that's probably that is what you've spent 30 years learning how to do.
Yeah. Well, first things first, email us some photographs. And then we'll be able to have a good look at it and see if we can work it out. But there might be other telltale signs on it, apart from design attributes. The type of handle used on it, there's 3 or 4 different types of campaign handle. If it's colonial made, then they mostly used what we would call skeletal campaign handles, like the ones on the Ramsey desk near the beginning of the lecture. But if not, some of the other handles you can get a broad time span on. But look at the locks as well. If there's a maker's mark to the lock, if it's a British lock and it's got a maker's name to it, then you can get information from that when they're in existence. If you're lucky and it's by Chubb, then they put serial numbers on all of their locks, individual serial numbers. And as with the Kane campaign chest that I discussed, we managed to date that, I think it was 15th of November 1850 to the lock. Yeah. But email us some photographs if you wish, and we'll have a look and see what we can tell you.
And Anne has put Sean's contact email address into the chat for anybody who would like to get back to you, and I'm sure there will be people. And there are other just fascinating things. I mean, I must say, just the last thing, I mean, we learned that David Röntgen was really innovative in terms of taking it so that his could take the legs off and unscrew them in order to transport them. But he must have somehow, maybe the German army was doing it, or maybe he had an English, maker, because it's clearly already been done that with the campaign furniture. So you have really taken us into so many different avenues of connecting this to other aspects of furniture, for which we're just enormously grateful. I mean, it was a fascinating talk, and I'm just checking that there is, yes, I think it's all right. The comments are just really coming in saying thank you, and as it's probably time for everybody to go and do something else because our time has run out, it's really time just again to repeat my thank yous and sort of setting us off on such a wonderful way. And I think we're going to all go out and buy picnic chairs for the new adventures for this summer in a different way, and thinking about their origins. They will look at them in no longer a plastic folding chair. We'll all be coming to get a proper one from you.
Yeah, and it was first designed in the 1870s when you sit on it and you hopefully gaze out to the sea and enjoy a break. Just think that the chair was designed in the 1870s.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I think on that note, it's a brilliant way for us to stop. So I'm just going to wish everybody a good evening or a good afternoon wherever you are. And thank you again. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody in the not too far distant future. And Sean, I'm sure we will be coming and knocking on your door from BIFMO.
Okay, good.
Thank you all.
Good. And thank you all for your time.
And goodbye.
Goodbye.